Were you not born for such a time as this? Or are you just an extra on the set? On March 26, 2001, sundown in Jerusalem, the astronomically and agriculturally corrected biblical Hebrew calendar hit the year 6001 from creation. After years of work, I made the final calculations to publish that the day or millennium of Yahovah had begun at that time. That week, unbeknownst to me, a large contingency of both Ashkenazi and Sephardic rabbis met at the western wall of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem and made a singularly significant declaration. The time of Jacob's trouble has now begun. They were well aware that 240 and one half years were deliberately subtracted from the elapsed time calendar on the modern Jewish calendar, 5762. That week, I learned that even the Masons understood that mankind had hit the year 6001. And every year since that date, the rabbis repeat the call to return that was issued on that momentous occasion. The seventh millennium had commenced. Less than 6 months later, a week before the Day of Trumpets, the two towers of the World Trade Center imploded, drawing America into World War III. The precursor to the beginning of the time of Jacob's trouble was the prophesied return of the Judeans, the Jews, to their homeland. Their return to the land has provoked a tidal assault against the Jewish people by the Quran-thumping Islamic fundamentalists who have vowed to exterminate the Jews from the planet and then to destroy the Christians. This holy war, or jihad in the parlance of Islam, will eventually plunge the nations of the world into thermonuclear war. When the smoke clears and the world's economies have, like the World Trade Centers, imploded, it will pave the way for the fulfillment of the atheist globalist dream of a new world order. The prophets gave explicit instructions to the generation who would witness the events at the end of the age. Those who ignore the words of the prophets will be masticated by the system that emerges from the rubble of the old world order. Many Christians have been primed for an imminent pre-tribulation secret rapture to preempt their participation, but no one will be leaving until the last trump on the feast of Yom Teruah, nearing the end of the tribulation, just before the wrath of the Almighty is poured out on the earth. Jeremiah speaks of the day when Yahovah will bring Israel again into the land which he gave unto their fathers. And even though the nation of Israel was born in one day, on May 15, 1948, in fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy, most of the Jews and the vast majority of dispersed Israelites have not even considered returning to the land. Jeremiah said that because of prosperity, the tribes would be dispersed for an extended period, but the time of Jacob's trouble will put an end to that prosperity and force the return of all the dispersed sons of Israel, both the Judeans and the northern 10 tribes of Israel. Jeremiah said that God would first send the fishermen, and they would fish them out of their exile. Then he would send the hunters to hunt them out of every cave and crevasse. Before the Second World War, most of the Jews in Europe were enjoying their exile. A few were fished back into the land by Herzl with the help of a growing troop of Christian Zionists who literally believed the Hebrew prophets. The majority of European Jewry did not want to go through the hardship of starting over in a hostile land that had been ransacked by Rome and the Muslims for 1900 years, but those that did not return willingly were later hunted out of every home, attic, and hiding place in Europe. They were mercilessly stripped of their property, their dignity, and for more than 6 million people, their lives. In the end, in one day, the modern state of Israel was born out of the labor pains of Judah's great tribulation. Before the Third World War began, most of the Jews in all of Israel were again enjoying their 2 millennium exile from the Promised Land. The majority of Jewry did not want to return to the land, and those that did return did not want the remnant of Israel to return unless they converted to the religion of Phariseeism. But in 2001, the beginning of Jacob's trouble, things began to get hostile. Muslim fundamentalists declared war on Christians and Jews. America was attacked, and two man-made mountains of brass, owned by an American Jew, came crumbling to the ground in New York City. 10 years later, in 2011, every Arab nation that was friendly or neutral to Israel experienced the Arab Spring, a revolution of the Muslim Brotherhood that was promoted and extolled by America's first president to bow, to grovel in submission to Muslim potentates. As he promised his Islamic lords, Hussein Obama withdrew U.S. troops from Iraq on schedule and deliberately left untold millions in vehicles and supplies for ISIS. Hussein Obama then opened the doors to the merciless torture, rape, crucifixions, beheadings, and mass slaughter of Christians in the area he refers to as the Levant. Hussein Obama then corrected the terminology of the newly formed ISIS, the Islamic State in Syria, to ISIL, Islamic State in the Levant, the area that includes all the land of Israel. Hussein Obama's legacy as U.S. president, the Arab Spring, resulted in the overthrow of every ally of America and Israel in the Middle East. As the prophet Jeremiah stated in the last days, it will not be just the time of Judah's trouble, but all of Israel will be tried in the crucible of tribulation. In the time of Jacob's trouble, all the sons of Israel who have been scattered over the face of the globe will be redeemed and brought back into the promised land by the hand of the Almighty. That tribulation will come at the hands of the moon god worshipers who are hell-bent on global domination and the submission of all who believe in the true God. The God of Islam is the God of death and the father of lies. 4,000 years ago, the creator of the heavens and the earth made an everlasting covenant with Abraham. All the land, from the Euphrates to the Nile, belongs to the sons of Israel. Shockwaves will shake the earth as heaven reaches down to fulfill that covenant, and every nation that interferes will find themselves on the battlefield against the Almighty. In the year 2006, that is when I presented the Jonah Code. The Jonah Code that laid out a prophetic timeline that is embedded in the scriptures, and was at that time that I said that I have more to share with you concerning 2017, but not yet. Waiting for confirmation on that very thing. I showed that the prophecy of Daniel is literally fulfilled on two layers. That prophecy, the 70 weeks prophecy, as it is often called, literally in Hebrew, it would be 77's prophecy. That was the answer to Daniel's question concerning the 70 years that we would be in exile, according to the prophet Jeremiah, as foretold by the prophet Moses. If we didn't keep the Sabbath year, the foreign nation would come in with their army, take us away into their land, into captivity, and the land would rest if we didn't let it rest when we dwelt in the land. And so this is what Israel did. They didn't keep the Sabbath. And so Babylon came in, took them away for 70 years. Coming to the end of this period of time, the angel Gabriel came to Daniel to answer his prayer, because Daniel sought the face of the Almighty. He prayed for revelation, and he was given the hidden things of darkness. He was shown what would transpire, and the angel gave him this cryptic prophecy that 77s would be determined upon the people and upon the holy city of Jerusalem to accomplish a number of things. And that these things would be divided up as 7 sevens, 62 sevens, after 62 sevens, 1 7, and in the midst of 7. I showed in the Jonah Code how Yeshua's ministry literally was 70 weeks, 77s. 490 days were complete. From the day he was baptized until the day he baptizes with the Holy Spirit is literally 70 weeks. The end of the 62nd week was his triumphal entry, which is on Shabbat. The next day is Sunday that begins the new week, and he was cut off in the midst of that week on Wednesday. After 3 days and 3 nights in the grave, he was raised on the Sabbath. And when the sun set, it was now the time of the first fruit offering. And that is why it says in the scriptures that when he cried with a loud voice, it is finished, the earthquake, the rocks rent, and the graves were opened. And when he arose, those in the graves that were broken open, they arose and appeared to many in the streets of Jerusalem. The following morning, after Yeshua, of course, was raised on the Sabbath, women came to the grave. When it was still dark, the tomb was empty. Just as the scripture says, he would be in the grave 3 days and 3 nights and raised on the third day, not the fourth night, the third day. So when they came, it was still dark, the grave was empty because he had gotten up the previous day. Then he presented the first fruits before the Father's throne in heaven and was back on the earth that morning to intercept the women who were returning from the grave, who were too late to prepare or to dress the body with the burial spices because he had already risen at that point in time. So it is that third layer that we see, 3 days and 3 nights in the grave, raised on the third day, and then from the day of first fruits, well, then we count 7 Sabbaths, 7 sevens to bring us to Shavuot. So here we have 77s from his baptism to the day he baptizes with the Holy Spirit, 62 sevens to bring us to the triumphal entry, 1 7 after the 62 sevens, 1 7, 1 week, he's cut off in the midst of the week, 3 days and 3 nights later, then you begin counting your 7 sevens. It's all there. It's also true, and I showed you that from the day that the commandment to go forth and rebuild Jerusalem under Messiah the Prince will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. It is in the 7th chapter of Ezra, where it says that we came out of Babylon by command of Artaxerxes in the 7th year of the reign of Artaxerxes on the first day of the first month. That would be the month of the Aviv, day 1 in the 7th year, which is 457 before the Common Era. You go exactly 7 sevens and 62 sevens, or a total of 69 sevens, or 483 years later, you come to Aviv 127 of the Common Era, the day Yeshua walked out of the wilderness, and Yohanan ben Zachariah said, "Behold the Lamb of God, which takes away the sin of the world." There is 1 7 yet to complete. And this 7 is divided just as Leviticus chapter 23, that there is the time of the Gentiles after the spring feast and before the fall feast begins. And this is the time frame that's set between when Yeshua came in as the prophet, "Behold the Lamb of God," and then the next marker begins the last 7, and that is the confirmation of the covenant, which is when the Ark of the Covenant is going to be revealed, the testimony that God put in the earth of his Son. That is what starts the last 7. And that is what I've been looking for. I've been calculating. I've been watching for this now for more than 20 years. I've been watching for this moment in time, knowing that there are legal prerequisites to the return of the Messiah, that he is not going to return any minute now. There are things that must take place. And so that third layer, I began to speak about this. And what transpired at that time and what opened the door to this is that for several years I have been attempting to figure out how to graphically illustrate Yeshua's ministry. And working with Camille, who was the head illustrator of the graphics department of Cornell University, she worked on this with me for a little bit, and I just couldn't get it to where it really made sense, that I really felt like this was it. And so a couple of years passed, and I was getting my groceries down to the Kibbutz Kinneret, and as I walked out with my paper bag full of groceries, walked out of the store on a bright, clear day, I stepped out the door, and I saw right in front of me in the sky, I saw the chart. I saw it in detail. I stood there and looked at it for well over a minute, just looked at the details on it, on that chart that I saw in the sky. It's literally a vision. I walked over to a picnic table, tore the bag open, emptying the groceries out, and an hour and a half I spent drawing it out, and then I went to my office, and it took me a month and a half to do it in Adobe Illustrator to cross-check it over and over and over, to where we had the Julian calendar, which was put in place 42 years before Yeshua was born, and it had the dates exactly right, and coordinating it with the day of the week, which is calculable down to a 10th of a day. It's just absolutely perfect. But the third layer of this was the sighting of the first sliver of the new moon, and coordinating that with the Julian calendar and the days of the week. And that is where I was then able to put the chronology of the Gospels all together. And what happened during this period of time, I began to develop the Jonah Code teaching. And it was 3 o'clock in the morning, the middle of the night, it hit me out of nowhere. What if the rabbinic calendar that bases the 13th month on a mathematical logarithm of 7 Adar bets, or 13 months every 19 years, not based on the V barley, but simply a mathematical logarithm, so that Passover stays in the spring of the year. Because if you don't add a 13th month on a regular basis, then you will find that you have a calendar just like the Muslims. It goes all the way around the year as far as the solar year is concerned. But the biblical calendar, the ripening of the barley, which is a phototropic spring crop, ripens according to the amount of rain, and then no rain, the amount of sun, etc. And it ripens according to those parameters, which the Almighty is in charge of those every single year. And so it hit me. What if they added an Adar bet onto that year? And as soon as that thought hit me, I immediately thought, how stupid of me not to ask that question before. Why not ask that years before? Because people would ask me, why is it, if this is true, that I'm saying that the feast of the Lord are the prophetic shadow pictures, that the Almighty runs the universe according to his calendar and his time clock, whether we know about it, recognize it, live by it or not, makes no difference to him. He does not spin the world around what we do not understand. If this is true, why did Israel become a nation in one day on a nothing date? This prophecy that Isaiah spoke, that it's never been heard before, that a nation is born at once, a nation is born in a day. As soon as Zion travails, she shall bring forth their children. It speaks it in the prophetic perfect tense, but that's what it's talking about, that Israel's children prevailing and then bringing forth in a day, in a moment in time. And yet May 15th, 1948 was a nowhere date. And I couldn't explain it. It just didn't, I couldn't explain it. And then it hit me. And I thought, why did I not think of this earlier? This is elementary. This is stupid, I thought. And then I recognized, no, the Almighty opens our eyes when he wants our eyes open. Behold, now is an acceptable time. The context is it's acceptable to him. It doesn't matter what we think. He does not run the universe according to what we want. It is a time that's acceptable to him. And just the question coming up at that point. It took me a few hours, and as I showed you, my books of calculations, thousands of calculations for the new moon and all, it didn't take me long. 5 minutes, look it up on the internet. The modern Jewish calendar, they calculated an Adar bet that year. That's easy. Now I have to go back 3 years, and I have to begin figuring when the new moon would be sighted, and when, historically, according to when the barley is normally Aviv in the land of Israel. I started doing the calculations back in 1942, 43, 44, going all the way, 1948, into the spring of 1948. And when I got there, I saw it's not necessary to add an Adar bet this year. And so, doing my pages of the calendar, I'm putting the dates, the pagan dates in. I'm putting in, okay, here's the first day of the month. Here's the 10th, the Passover lamb would be selected. Here's the 14th, Passover lamb would be killed. Here is the weekly Sabbath during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Now, at the end of the weekly Sabbath, this is the day of first fruits. We count our 7 Sabbaths, and I keep numbering the pages. I turn the next page. I turn the next page. May 15th, 1948, the 7th Sabbath of the counting of the Omer. This is what we were told to do forever, ladies and gentlemen. Right there in the Torah. It tells us to count these 7 Sabbaths forever and never tells us why. Why do we do this? Why are these 7 Sabbaths important? Not only do they bring us to when the Torah was shouted down from Mount Sinai, but there is a prophetic shadow picture in the future that there is no indication in the Gospels that Yeshua fulfilled anything concerning these counting of these 7 Sabbaths. In fact, the day of his ascension breaks that whole pattern there. There's a break in the pattern. What's going on? It's a 10-day break. He was seen of 40 days, and that Pentecost literally means the 50th. He was seen by 40. That means the ascension was 10 days earlier. What are these 10 days? What is this 10 that is missing from there? Well, at that time, I said that I see a third layer here. Because one of the things I saw, General Allenby entered into Jerusalem in 1917, December 17th. And then one Jubilee series later, 1967, Israel takes Jerusalem. The next Jubilee in that cycle would be 2017. I also saw that May 15th, 1948, you go 70 years into the future, as we were 70 years in exile, 70 years in the future, it's 2017. And so I asked the question then, and I've asked it for years after that, has not the Almighty shown us his Jubilees? Well, I was shocked to find out that it would be 10 years later asking that question for 10 years. And then finally, in August 2016, exactly 10 years after I launched the Jonah Code, that is when the confirmation comes. And that is what I am here to share with you at this point in time. Now, I had been praying and watching this because I saw that in 2006, I saw the next possibility for the confirmation of the covenant would be 2010. It couldn't be before then. 2010 could be it. Because 2010 was the 63rd Shavuot. And again, remember the pattern. The pattern is 70. And then we have 7 sevens, 62 sevens, after 62 sevens, 1 7 in the midst of 7. We have that pattern, and so I was looking for how this pattern would then play out. And so I saw that from 1948, we go to, after 62 sevens, we come to the 63rd Shavuot, the 63rd year, the 63rd Shavuot. This is the earliest possible time, and I am praying for confirmation. Are we on schedule for 2017? Now, what I'm watching for is the confirmation of the covenant, because that is the only indicator that begins the last 7 years. Wars, rumors of wars, all this, earthquakes. Yeshua said all these things are going to take place, but it's not the end yet. You know, don't get shook up when you see that taking place, because that's going to be taking place. That's going to happen, but that's not the sign of the end. He said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by the prophet, that is when the telos begins. That's the home stretch to the end. But we're given something 3.5 years before then. It is referred to as the confirmation of the covenant. It is something that he, the Messiah, does. It is he who makes reconciliation for iniquity. It is he who atones for sins. It is he who will eventually bring in everlasting righteousness. It is he who is the prophet who must be authenticated, and it is he who anoints the most holy. The most holy artifact on planet Earth is the Ark of the Covenant, and it was anointed with blood. And it is he, the Messiah, who anointed the Ark of the Covenant with his own blood when the earth quaked and the rocks rent and the earth split open and the soldier ripped open his side and outpoured the blood and the water from his side down through the earthquake onto the Ark of the Covenant. And with that being accomplished, the confirmation of that is what starts the last 7. It will be the end of the time of the Gentiles. Not that the Gentiles cannot be brought into the family of faith after that. No, it's just the blindness in part that happens to Israel will be ended. That is what we're talking about at that particular point in time. And so I am praying about this, and I am up in the Galilee. I'm praying about this, and then I hear, call an emergency convocation. In exactly 1 week, it will be the 63rd Shavuot. And so I put it out on the internet. I put the word out around the world. I said that for the last 10 years, every year we have been gathering together at the southern steps of the Temple Mount for Shavuot. This 63rd Shavuot is indeed a most momentous time. We are praying for confirmation on 2017, to know where we are on the Creator's calendar and to know what the Almighty wants us to know about this. Are we on schedule? And so we put the word out to the whole world, and then the morning of Shavuot, that is when I am leaving the Galilee. I'm on my way to Jerusalem, and I get a call from the Ophel Gardens, from the administration there. And they said that I was going to have to pay for access. And I said, I have not had to pay for access. I was doing this before there was an Ophel Gardens. I was there doing this when we used to have to climb over a fence to get into this area because it wasn't even open. I've been doing it every single year because the Western Wall, the Orthodox have that. I'm a Messianic Jew. This is where we get together on the southern steps. You can't charge me for this. This is a religious convocation. And they said, you're not getting in unless you do pay. I go ballistic on them. I'll say, I have all these programs that I'm on television with Ophel Gardens. I give you advertisement every single week. I'll be sure to tell everyone what you're pulling on me at this point. I was absolutely irate. I said, and so I get there and I argue with them some more. I said, okay, you write down every person's name. If they come and say they're coming to this, you put their name down, and then I will come out at the end of it and I will pay for it. They know me. They know I'm good for it, that I'm not blowing smoke. And so we get together and we do that convocation. Just before I am finished teaching, that's when Russell and Renee Swan out of Waco, Texas, they get up and go out, and then they come back in, they sit back down. I don't know what has transpired, but they went out, and right after we closed with prayer, and again, asking and praying for confirmation where we are on the Creator's reckoning of time. And being right on the southern steps, right where the Aviv court met, where Gamaliel and Gehanan, where all these things transpired in antiquity, sitting on the same steps with this group of people, they came back and said to me, do you realize why you had to pay for this? And I said, I really didn't know. And they said, do you ever take account how many people come to this? Do you have an idea how many people were here? I said, no. And she said, well, that's why they took account. Because there are exactly 63 people who have come from all over the world to be here at this moment in time. Exactly 63 on the 63rd Shavuot. That's why you were charged for the first time in your life. Because you wouldn't have taken account for yourself. They took account for you. Well, I knew that things were not ramping up, that we were not going to see the confirmation of the covenant there in the fall of 2010. But that was what we prayed for. Are we on track for 2017? Because 2017, that is the year that we're watching for. That is the first time, or the next time after 2010 for the confirmation of the covenant. And that is what we are watching for and waiting for at this moment in time. Before we continue on, before I take you into this final journey, we're going to stop right now because I want to give you the opportunity to participate in this ministry. And it doesn't matter when you see this, you're going to be watching this. Most people in the world are watching this on YouTube. Why? Because YouTube gets this out free of charge to the entire world, and it cost us thousands and thousands to do this. Others are watching this week as it goes out on the various networks that we pay to put this out on. And no matter how you're getting it, it is costing us tens of thousands of dollars for every time that we put this out there. And to do it, we need your help. We're not asking you to help us do something like get the word of God over the world or take the gospel of the kingdom someplace and just keep on raising money and never doing it. No, we're doing it already. We're just asking you to join in with us. I know television preachers have been sucking money from you, saying they're going to do this, they're going to do that. All they did was raise money because these morons don't even know what the gospel of the kingdom is. They are just blood-sucking, money-grubbing, and I'm not saying all of them, but I mean, there are just some of them that's just, it's a shame. It's an insult. I'm not promising you anything except to do what Yeshua said, get the gospel of the kingdom that I teach to the whole world. So whenever you're watching this, it's not free just because you own a computer that costs thousands of dollars. It's not free because you can pay your bill. It's free because we're putting it out to you free of charge. And everything that's worth anything in life costs something. So here, I'm asking you to don't muzzle the ox. We have freely given. Now it's your time to freely give. The Shavuot in Jerusalem of 2010 was the 63rd Shavuot from Israel becoming a nation in one day, fulfilling the prophecy of Isaiah. That happened on the seventh Sabbath of the counting of the Omer, which is May 15th, 1948. However, no one on planet Earth knew it. Why? No one was working on the restoration of the ancient biblical calendar. The ancient biblical calendar that was in use all the way up until 359 of the Common Era, when the Sanhedrin, in their last act, decided that they were going to institute a new calendar. They did the calculations, and this would be a mathematically derived calendar so that the Jews scattered over every continent would still be able to keep the feast at the same time, but it wasn't according to the ancient reckoning. The Sanhedrin's job was to certify that new moon witnesses had actually seen the new moon. And every spring that the barley was Aviv. And so that would be the beginning of the year. But with the destruction of the temple and the first fruits of the barley being no longer offered, there were things that just were not done. And since Constantine put the death verdict upon anyone who would be in the future ordained into the Sanhedrin, and the old members of the Sanhedrin knew that when they died, that would be the end of the Sanhedrin, they decided to shut themselves down and to go into exile early, instituting a calendar that they said that they would keep until the Messiah comes. They made takanot. They made a law which changed biblical law. They cited a ma'aseh, an act of the rabbis, which served as a legal a legal precedent that would allow them to make this change. But Yeshua said, do not follow the takanot and the ma'asim of the Pharisees. They say they follow Moses, but they do not do what Moses says to do. Yeshua said specifically, don't follow them. Yet, what has happened is that those who say they follow Yeshua really don't listen to him. They don't do what he says to do. And a lot of them want to follow what the Pharisees did because it makes them feel, all cozy with Judah or something. But I'd rather feel cozy with the Messiah and be obedient to him than to come up with and follow along with this new calendar system. Well, the whole world was following that calendar system, or that was the only one they were aware of. And so in 1948, no one on the planet knew that Israel became a nation on one day, fulfilling this ancient prophecy, because we were told to count these 7 Sabbaths every single year, forever and ever. Each of the feasts are prophetic shadow pictures. And so now, we see this, 2010, the 63rd Shavuot. There's a confirmation, but what is this confirmation? It is simply the confirmation that we are on schedule for 2017. Now, I need to go back, and we need to start over from where we were before. In 1917, General Allenby took Jerusalem. Now, you ask, what is the significance of this? If 1917 were a jubilee and the land goes back to its owner, then we go another jubilee into the future. It's 1967 in Israel. The Jewish nation takes Jerusalem. And so I want to go back to Genesis and read and give you a little bit of background on this before I give the dates on this. Genesis chapter 15, verse 18. Yehovah made a covenant with Abram, saying, unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates. Now, it doesn't say which river in Egypt. I like to say the Nile, because I think we should take just as much as we can possibly get when the time comes. But again, this is up to the Almighty. It's not up to me. I don't make policy, and I don't make war plans. Deuteronomy, but it does go halfway into rock, to the Euphrates River, no question about it. Deuteronomy 7:22, very important. And Yehovah, thy Elohim, thy God, will put out those nations before thee, little and little, by little and little. You may not consume them at once, lest the beast of the fields increase upon thee. In other words, we are not going to get all of the land at one time, from the Euphrates to the great river in Egypt. Your number is insufficient. The beast, the wild beast, will inhabit the land before you ever get the opportunity to grow to a number sufficient for that mass of land. You're going to get a smaller area of land, and that is what we got right from the very beginning. Leviticus 25:1. Yehovah spake unto Moses on Mount Sinai and said, you tell the children of Israel, when you come into the land that I give you, this is verse 2, then shall the land keep a Sabbath unto Yehovah. 6 years you shall sow the field, 6 years you shall prune the vineyard, and gather in the fruit. But the 7th shall be a Sabbath of rest unto the land, a Sabbath for Yehovah. Thou shalt neither sow the field, nor prune your vineyard. And verse 8, and you shall number 7 Sabbaths of years unto thee, 7 times 7 years. And the space of the 7 Sabbaths of years shall be unto thee 49 years. Then thou shalt cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month. In the day of atonement shall you make the trumpet sound throughout your land, and you shall hallow the 50th year. 50th year, 50th is in Greek Pentecosta again. This numeration of years is exactly what we're told to do every year in the numeration of weeks. From when the first fruit offering is given, then you go and count 7 Sabbaths. So this is always done on the day after the Sabbath, so you count into the future, 1 Sabbath, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and the day after the 7th Sabbath is Shavuot, this celebration, and that's the 50th day. Israel became a nation in one day on the 7th Sabbath of the count of the Omer. The following day was the celebration, Shavuot. And so, as far as years are concerned, is that you enter into the land, then you begin counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's the Sabbath year. You do that 7 times. That's 49 years. The next year is the Jubilee year. Now, there's been some confusion, and that's why I had Nehemiah Gordon come on the program. It was a textual scholar, Hebrew textual scholar, and he is reading text in works that will never be translated into any other language. They're just in Hebrew. It's just not a concern of anyone else on the planet. But I was asking him the question so that he would clarify it for all of you. So, whether you want to take my word for it or not, here is the foremost Hebrew scholar, the only one that's working with any Messianic ministry on the planet. And so he laid this out, is that the Jubilee year is the 50th year. And after the 50th year, you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and that's a Sabbath year. There are those modern rabbis, just in the last 50 years or so, that have tried to say that the first year after the Jubilee is actually the first year of the next series. That, he says, is nonsense. That what they are trying to do is to justify something that the rabbis admitted when the temple was destroyed. They said that when the temple was destroyed, they no longer calculated the Jubilee year. Meaning 49 years, and so it goes every 7 years. There's never a Jubilee that's intercalculated. And so whoever comes up with a Jubilee period, according to this system, is just plain going to be wrong. The modern Jewish Jubilee certainly is not right because it was instituted in 1952, and between 1952 and now, it's been more than 50 years. I was born in 52. And there would have been a Jubilee calculated, and so it would throw it off by a year even at that. But again, they have not calculated a Jubilee because, number one, when we lived in the land, we didn't keep the Sabbath year to begin with. That's simply letting the land rest. The Jubilee is a much bigger situation. It's not just letting the land rest, which it did the year before, and then resting that year. I am going to read, continuing on, Leviticus 25 and verse 10. And this 50th year you shall proclaim liberty throughout all the land to the inhabitants thereof. It shall be a jubilee to you, and you shall return his possession unto every man, and you shall return every man to his family. A jubilee shall that 50th year be to you. You'll not sow, you're not going to reap that which grows of itself, nor are you going to gather the grapes of it in your vine undressed. For it is a jubilee, holy to you. In the year of Jubilee, verse 13, you shall return to every man his possession. And if you sell aught unto your neighbor, or you bought aught from your neighbor's hand, you shall not oppress each other. According to the number of years after the Jubilee, you shall buy of your neighbor, and according to the number of years of the fruits thereof, he shall sell to thee. According to the multitude of years, thou shalt increase the price. According to the fewness of the years, you shall diminish the price. So, if it's immediately the next year after the Jubilee, you know that you're selling it for 49 years. You get a big price. If it's 3 years until the next Jubilee, the person that buys that land knows that he has to return it to you. It's all about the land going back to the original owner. And this is what we see with Israel. When you come into the land, you shall let the land rest. When you come into the land, after it's rested 7 times in a 49-year period, the next year will be a Jubilee. So if you've sold any of this land to your neighbor, it comes back to the original owner. And there are some stipulations concerning Levitical land and land that's inside walled cities and all, but that's not germane to this particular situation. What I am looking at and what I see in 2006 Number one, Israel becomes a nation in one day on the seventh Sabbath of the count of the Omer, and nobody on the planet was aware of it. If we go from that day, Shavuot, and we go 7 years into advance, we are at 2017. That's just a number, 70. Except it's a number of great prophetic significance. That's how long we were ejected out of the land. Now, this will be how long after nearly 2,000 years of exile, we come back into the land. 70 years. I think that's significant. I look at these 7 Sabbaths, 62 Sabbaths. I look at the 63rd Shavuot as being significant to let us know if we're on track. What happens? I call a holy convocation. Exactly 63 people are there. There are people that had to fly around the world to get there. There are people that don't get there, even though they've flown around the world, they don't get there in time for the convocation, because if they did, we wouldn't have had 63 people. They made it into the land, but they didn't make it to the convocation. They were never counted for that prophetically significant moment in time. So I'm looking at this in 2017, but I also see that in 1917, General Allenby takes Jerusalem, and this was really a miracle, ladies and gentlemen, because from the silver birds flying over the land of Israel, they dropped leaflets telling the Arabs to surrender, the Muslims to surrender. Well, Allenby and Allah in Arabic script look just about identical to your average Arab. They thought that Allah was sending them a message to surrender, and so they did. And Allenby, when he made his triumphal entry into Jerusalem, he did it on 12/17, December 17, and he made a point. He got off from his vehicle. He would not ride through the streets because the king, Yeshua, rode into the streets of Jerusalem on a donkey. He then walked through. He said he will not ride through when the king alone should come through. And so on December 17th, he came into Jerusalem, and by the act of the League of Nations, this is when Israel, Jerusalem, that city, became no man's land. Didn't belong to anyone. It was technically no man's land. There were Jews, there were Muslims, there were Christians. It was just across the board that Jerusalem catered to at that period of time. But then, exactly from 1917, we go one Jubilee into the future, 1967, that is the Six-Day War, and that's when the Jewish nation captured the city of Jerusalem. They had been under siege, they had been the merciless slaughter of the people at the hands of the Jordanian Muslims had been going on for that entire Jubilee cycle, and then finally they take it. They take the Temple Mount, and as they did, they actually turned over the Temple Mount to the Muslims when they had it free and clear. And so then I look at the next Jubilee. That is 2017. The Jubilee in that cycle, but who can say that this is a Jubilee? I simply was asking, has the Almighty not shown us when his Jubilees are? And then I'm looking at another situation that comes up, and this is the outgrowth of what transpired, because it was in the year 2008 that I was given the prophecy of the beating of Balaam's ass, which is Balaam's parable prophecy, which he was taken up to 3 summits by Balak, who had united all the kings, all the princes around him, and taken them all up to 3 summit meetings to have Balaam see the children of Israel who are trying to come in and take their land for the first time, and Balak wants Balaam to curse them at this United Nations meeting, and so Balaam tells him exactly what he hears from heaven. On these 3 UN summit meetings, I want you to build 7 altars and sacrifice 7 bulls and 7 rams on those 7 altars. 777, 3 different times. In 1993, the UN summit, the Oslo Peace Accord, a 7-year agreement in which Israel was to give over the land that was given to them by a covenant of God forever. And what happened is that was annulled by violence before sundown, September 28th. Seeing that was not working in the summer of 2000, July, there was another summit meeting, the Camp David. That summit meeting, again, 7-year plan to have Israel give away this land for the promise of peace by the United Nations. Then, 7 years later, it was 2007, the year after the Jonah Code was done, and the year before Balaam's ass revelation was given, that the Annapolis Peace Accord. 3 UN summits, 7 years apart, exactly. And it was a 7-year plan for each one of those. 3.5 years after the Annapolis, the final one, that is Shavuot, the 63rd Shavuot from when Israel became a nation in one day. This last year, I was praying and asking, when will this take place? Are we in line? Is this ready to go? And honestly, I'm not looking forward to the things that I see transpiring, but I know the prophecy of Isaiah that after this existential war spoken of Joel, when the moon is turned to blood, the sun is darkened, the stars are darkened, they're blood and fire and pillars of smoke, invading army. Before them, it's like Israel's the Garden of Eden. Behind them is a smoldering wasteland. That at the end of that is the latter rain outpouring. That is when all of Israel, according to Isaiah, will be regathered in the land. Even people from the nation, the land of China, is spoken specifically. No other nation is spoken specifically, but China is. Ladies and gentlemen, this was set to go, and I have some help. I have some help that comes from heaven, and it comes to another country, to someone who has never met me. And this is how it works. He, the Almighty, gives him a message, a clear message that is then brought to me, but it has to be translated because we don't speak each other's languages. And he gives me specific information and knows things that that no one knows. No one knows. And that is the one thing that I ask of the Almighty. If you send someone with a message, then they have to immediately start out by telling me something that they can't possibly know. This person gave specific revelation and information concerning what I was to do in going back to Israel. And so in the spring of this last year, I went back there up on the Golan Heights. I prayed. I read the scriptures he said to read. And I was told to pray and ask about the hidden things, the dark things, the hidden things. And I prayed for them. I prayed. And then I was given more information to go back and what to put in order in August. And then when everything was done, then finally the last piece came. Everything was done. And I'm not going to specify what was done except for the fact that everything was accomplished. I had gone through one of the hardest periods of my life, and at that moment in time, that is when a person who had gone through great trouble and tribulation, a Messianic Jew there in the Galilee, came to me with this. There's a rabbi in the 13th century, early in the 1200s, and he wrote 3 books, but only one still exists. The other 2, there are just brief quotations in other books. His name is Judah. He was called Judah the Pious, Judah the Righteous. He was a German rabbi. And what he was known for is calling the people to live a righteous and a godly life, calling them back to the Torah, to be obedient to the Torah. That was his message. That was his life. And that is what he was known for. He was given a word. As a matter of fact, he said that when they asked him, where did you get this information? He said that Elijah came to his Passover and he told him this. He wrote it and then he died after he wrote this. Now, this is not the first time that I've heard of Elijah showing up. And the first time I heard it and believed it, Nehemiah Gordon told about when he was a child and was sent to the door and was sent to see if Elijah had come to their Passover. He opened the door and he saw a man there and he knew it was Elijah. It scared him. He shut the door. He walked away and never told anyone. Years later, he said, I've told one other person, I'm going to tell you, Michael. And then he made it known on the Open Door series, and that's why I broadcast this. Because I saw Nehemiah Gordon, an Orthodox Jew who turned Karaite Jew. I saw him being led by the Spirit, and I knew he was being led by the Spirit to make discoveries that no one could possibly make. Now, we are going back to 1217 and Judah the righteous. Judah was given this prophecy. For 8 Jubilees, the Ottoman Turks will rule Jerusalem. For 1 Jubilee, Jerusalem will be no man's land. Then, for 1 Jubilee, it will be in the hands of the Jewish nation, which hadn't existed in nearly over 1,000 years. The next Jubilee will begin the end-time Messianic age. This is what he wrote in 1217. 300 years after that, 300 years or 6 Jubilees exactly, 1517, the Ottoman Turks come to full power and they take Jerusalem. They take Jerusalem for exactly 8 Jubilees until 1917, when on 1217, December 17th, General Allenby takes Jerusalem. By the command of the League of Nations, predecessor to the United Nations, it is officially declared no man's land for 1 Jubilee until 1967, when the Jewish nation, which didn't even exist in 1917 or in 1217 or any time since 68, the Jewish nation then took Jerusalem. For 1 Jubilee, which brings us to 1217, to bring us to the end-time Messianic age. I prayed for all those years. Has not the Almighty shown us his Jubilees? These are his Jubilees. He sent his messengers, he sent his prophets to make known these things, and Judah the righteous, a Jewish prophet, because it doesn't matter where the Christians are on this or the rest of the world. It matters where Israel is and what Israel understands, because Israel is God's chosen people and is the land of Israel where the Jubilees will go back to the original owner. Now we come to the time of Isaiah, chapter 49, the acceptable time with the Almighty. Israel is brought to the brink of extinction. There is no hope whatsoever for Israel to survive. But can a mother forget her sucking child? Maybe, but I can't forget you. And the Almighty crushes the invading army. Zechariah's thermonuclear war, which has killed 2/3 of the people, and the people of Zion cry out, I've lost all my children. Where are all these children coming from? They're coming from the ends of the earth to the land of Israel. This is what is about to transpire, ladies and gentlemen. At the end of this war, which has been prepared, you have voted for it. You wanted change. You're getting change, sweetheart. It's coming your way. You wanted change? How about some economic collapse? How about thermonuclear war? How about the shaking of the entire earth that's going to end the time of prosperity, and it's going to cause all of Israel, not just the Jews, but all of Israel, which, remember, Israel is older than China and India, yet China and India are both over 1 billion people. If the children of Israel were all still in the land of Israel, how many would they be? They'd be over 1 billion people. They've been scattered. And where are they? Where they are is going to end, because in the time of trouble ahead, they are going to be regathered into the land of Israel. You can say, like the Jews of Europe, hey, I'm more American than I am Jewish. I'm more American than Israel. Why would I want to go there? Well, wait till you see what happens, ladies and gentlemen. Then you'll understand why the Almighty said, this land is yours. It's yours forever. Get ready. Get cleaned up. It is time to get ready, because the beginning of the Messianic age, the end-time Messianic age, is upon us. The confirmation of the covenant. Watch this fall. Sundown, September 23rd, will be the Day of Trumpets. The upcoming Day of Trumpets will not be the gathering together or rapture, so much anticipated by the dispensational theologians of American Gentile churchianity, but rather the initiation of the intermediate fulfillment of the fall feast of the Lord. Nuclear war will level Damascus and bring the nation of Israel to its knees, right where Almighty God wants them before the revealing of the Ark of the Covenant on Yom Kippur. According to the plan of Hussein Obama and the United Nations, millions of Israelis will be dead before the smoke clears. Global economic collapse will precipitate the gathering of the lost tribes of Israel from the ends of the earth and bring them into the smoldering ruins of the land of Israel. This will lead up to the Feast of Tabernacles on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, soon to be purged of its gold-domed abomination. On the last great day, the latter rain, the double portion outpouring of the Holy Spirit, and the sealing of the 144,000 of all the tribes of Israel will equip the righteous for the final 7-year dash to the finish line and the reward ceremony on the sea of fire and glass. Israel is the only nation that will not immediately come under the boot of the totalitarian New World Order, because when all appears to be lost, the nation of Israel will call on the name of Yehovah, and the Almighty will take the battlefield on their behalf. Yehovah's promise to Abraham will be upheld, and the fictitious moon god worshippers will acknowledge at last their folly and bow in respect to the one true God. Those who are called will miraculously find their way to a sanctuary littered with dead bodies. 16 years ago, at the time I was given the revelation concerning Zechariah's thermonuclear war, I prophesied that the Muslims would be used to judge America. I could not have imagined that our brainwashed offspring would actually elect one of the most diabolical and deceitful Muslims on the face of the earth to lead them into their own destruction. Judgment is indeed beginning in the house of Yehovah. It was a privilege to serve you, an honor to serve with you, and it will be an honor to die by your side in the service of the King of Kings, the prophet, Yeshua HaMashiach. God have mercy on those who love him and who are the called to his kingdom. I will see you on the sea of fire and glass when the smoke clears. Shalom. Peace.